Imposter syndrome prevents people from internalizing their own success. No matter what the achievement, a person with imposter syndrome can always find a way to minimize their contribution to the end result, excusing away their efforts with a constant internal monologue that reinforces the idea that their success came as a result of anything other than the fact that they worked hard and they're good at what they do. This person is more likely to say that it was a team effort, that they were simply in the right place at the right time, or worse yet, that they happened to know the right people. The list goes on, and while some of these factors definitely have their part to play in any success story, this relentless drive to link personal achievements to external factors perpetuates negative feedback loops based on avoidance and overwork, lest it be discovered that this person is simply treading water and doesn't really know what they're doing because they're an imposter. If any of this sounds even vaguely familiar, then stay tuned, because in this video, I'm going to share what I learned about imposter syndrome and how to cure it from this book written by Dr Jessamy Hibbard. Described by the Sunday Times as the definitive guide to beating imposter syndrome, The Imposter Cure is an instantly accessible read, as it makes clear from the beginning that this is something that we can all experience. It does this by citing an anecdote from fellow author Neil Gaiman, where, as the story goes, he happened to be attending a gathering one evening, and upon making small talk with another man about a number of things, including the name that they shared, the other Neil turns to Gaiman and says that he just can't figure out why he's been invited to the event. Everyone else has either achieved or discovered something amazing, and I just went where I was sent. To which Gaiman replied, "Yes, Neil, but you were the first man on the moon." I'm paraphrasing here, but the quote continues and surmises that if a person that went to the moon and back can find a way to externalize their success and feel like an imposter in a room full of high achievers, then perhaps there are no grown-ups and nobody has it all figured out. Chapter 1 discusses how our experience of imposter syndrome varies based on how we define competence, which makes sense because we all have a slightly different concept of success. For example, the perfectionist, which is the most common competence type, has a primary focus on how things are done. They set themselves very high standards and believe they should deliver perfection 100% of the time, creating a cycle where their best efforts are never good enough. The natural genius cares about how and when things are done. They set impossibly high standards just like the perfectionist, but are more concerned about getting things right first time. The soloist defines competence as being able to do something on their own, and that achievement only counts if it's unassisted. The expert is the knowledge version of the perfectionist. Their primary concern is on what or how much you know and can do. Lastly, the Superman or Superwoman pushes themselves to work harder than anyone else. If they fall short on any of their self-designated roles, they feel shame or guilt because they feel they should be able to handle everything. With this in mind, imposter syndrome is described like a well-worn path with a swamp at the bottom. Being aware of your competence type makes it easier to take more informed decisions when real-time information about your situation is outweighed by your perception of discomfort. Another way you might do this is outlined in Chapter 2, which talks about the importance of distinguishing between feelings and facts. One of the challenges we have here is that our amygdalas have evolved to become so good at detecting threats that it fails to distinguish the fear we experience from a real threat, such as being in a room with a lion, versus a perceived threat, such as you're not good enough or don't belong. Chapter 4 explains the machinations of confirmation bias and why it makes it hard for us to update the beliefs we hold about ourselves. This is because when you bring to mind a belief, you bring up not just the thought, but the emotion attached to it. And due to the way our threat detection system has evolved, emotions react much quicker than rational thought or reasoning, which can distort the way we attend to information. Think of it as a children's shape sorter, where positive feedback has to be exactly the right size, shape, and presented at the right angle to fit in, whereas negative feedback can be collected en masse in a huge bucket. Chapter 5 expands on how the beliefs we hold about ourselves influences our coping strategies and how we interact with the world. For example, if you believe you're an imposter, problem coping strategies such as self-doubt and perfectionism may seem like a good way to stay under the radar and prevent people from discovering the truth. However, and as weird as this may sound, the book uses a nursery rhyme to highlight how these coping strategies are actually part of the problem. The rhyme describes an old lady that swallowed a fly and thought she might die. To remove the fly, she swallowed a spider. To remove the spider, she swallows a bird. Cat to catch the bird, a dog to catch the cat, and so on until she swallows a horse and dies. The point here is that fear, if unchecked, can drive us to do things without thinking them through. In this case, problem coping strategies can prevent us from updating the view of ourselves that we are imposters. A more somber analogy of why we might want to start doing this sooner rather than later is presented in the form of an example from a book by Brinny Ware, an Australian nurse who spent several years giving palliative care to patients during the last 12 weeks of their life. She collected her observations in a book called The Top 5 Regrets Before Dying. When questioned about regret or anything they wish they'd done differently, her patients' responses focused on 5 central themes. They wish they had the courage to live life true to themselves and not the one that others expected. That they hadn't worked so hard. That they had the courage to express their feelings and allowed themselves to be happier. And on that note, Chapter 9 further explains the pitfalls of constantly aiming for perfection. Chief among them is that it prevents you from enjoying your current position and encourages you to devalue all of your preceding hard work, as it will never be enough. Perfectionism comes from pinning your identity on your achievements, meaning that when you fail, you don't just feel bad about the task, you feel shame about who you are. Therefore, the drive to achieve perfection can be a self-defeating addiction. Ergo, if you're always perfect, you'll never fail. And if you never fail, you'll never feel shame. However, like death by 1,000 cuts, these small sacrifices that seem justifiable at first soon add up. Be this time with friends, family, intimate relationships, mental health, or physical well-being. It suggests that an alternative, healthier, and more sustainable approach might be found in focusing on the process as opposed to the end result. And a very good reason for this is referenced in Chapter 12 via a quote from a TEDx talk by Oliver Burkeman. He says that based on an average human lifespan of 4,000 weeks, we are finite individuals, but the number of things that we could have done is infinite. With that in mind, we do well to face the fact that we only have a limited amount of time, and using it to focus on the process brings greater meaning and happiness. In other words, you don't have control over how you become something, but you do have control over how you spend the most important asset of your life. Chapter 13 talks about how you might use that time to validate the impact of your skill set instead of explaining it away, alongside how not being sure, asking for help, looking things up, and taking time to get back to people is not a sign of weakness, and in fact demonstrates knowledge and intelligence to recognize gaps in your awareness, which is the opposite of something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, where overconfidence predisposes you to a lack of awareness or limited knowledge. In any event, no one can know it all. The final chapter talks about how we can increase our tolerance for uncertainty and protect our mental well-being in the process. This includes breathing exercises that recognize the mind-body connection and help us to self-regulate, the importance of taking time to celebrate your accomplishments, and why we should try to avoid comparing the worst elements of our minds with what we see from other people. All 14 chapters of The Imposter Cure are glued together by case studies from clients that the author has worked with, which in my opinion makes what is already relatable material even more impactful. There's also a reassuring authenticity that comes across throughout the book, almost as if the author was searching for answers for themselves alongside the people the book was designed to help. It asks questions of the reader, gives you strategies to take away, and recognizes that sometimes life happens, and that it won't always be easy to keep the imposter quiet. With that in mind, if what you do will never be enough, why not pick 1 or 2 things you enjoy and do a little less? Thank you, Dr. Jessamy Hibberd. If imposter syndrome sounds like something you've experienced and you'd like the opportunity to learn more, form your own opinion, and support this channel, then please use the link in the description. Lastly, don't forget to subscribe for more content that's dedicated to helping you have more accessible conversations about mental health, well-being, and inclusion.